McDonald's almost died in 1974, but they didn't. 12 other restaurant chains that seemed just as unstoppable did. These weren't small mom-and-pop shops. These were massive empires with hundreds of locations. What killed giants that looked immortal while McDonald's survived? Back in the 70s, Lums restaurants had something nobody else dared to try: hot dogs steamed in beer. Sounds crazy? Well, it worked like a charm for years. The whole place felt like your buddy's finished basement. All dark wood paneling and that cozy beer garden vibe that made you want to stick around for another round. You know, back when restaurants actually had personality instead of looking like sterile doctors' offices. At its peak, Lums boasted over 400 locations across America. That's more restaurants than some people have Facebook friends. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. Take America's favorite drunk food and make it the star of a legitimate restaurant chain. But here's where things get interesting. When new ownership took over, they got greedy fast. They expanded quicker than a waistband after Thanksgiving dinner, opening locations left and right without thinking about whether they could actually run them properly. Quality started slipping faster than a banana peel gag. One Lum served decent food, another served something that barely qualified as edible. Customers noticed. Trust me, people in the 70s weren't shy about complaining when their beer-steamed hot dog tasted like it was steamed in dishwater instead. The restaurant industry was changing too. McDonald's was perfecting their assembly line approach, while Lums was still trying to figure out how to steam hot dogs consistently across hundreds of locations. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the knife was a beer-steamed frankfurter. By the early 80s, financial missteps piled up like empty beer bottles after a college party. Store after store closed their doors for good. Then there's the story of another chain that faced an entirely different kind of problem. One that had nothing to do with food quality and everything to do with a name that would eventually destroy everything they built. Sambo's Pancake House served up more than just breakfast. It dished out a controversy that would eventually kill the brand. And honestly, the writing was on the wall from day one. The chain knew how to pack customers in, no question about it. At its peak, Sambo's was flipping pancakes for 6 million hungry customers. Their 24-hour service meant you could grab a stack at 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. Pretty smart, right? Night shift workers loved them. Insomniacs, too. But here's where things get sticky as syrup on a Sunday morning. The name itself was a ticking time bomb. Based on a children's story about a boy and some tigers, sure, but most Americans heard something entirely different. The racial undertones were about as subtle as a brick through a diner window. Makes sense why people started raising eyebrows. Well, raising eyebrows turned into something much bigger. Boycotts hit harder than a bad hangover. Legal battles piled up faster than dirty dishes during the breakfast rush. Community leaders weren't just upset, they were organized. And when organized people stop spending money at your restaurants, you've got a real problem. The weird part is how long they held on. Even as protests grew louder and locations started closing, corporate kept defending the name. Like trying to explain a joke that wasn't funny in the first place, it just made everything worse. By the early 80s, most locations had shuttered their doors for good. The last holdout managed to survive until recently, thanks to some legal grandfather clause that let them keep the controversial name. But before Sambo's stirred up all that trouble, there was another chain making waves with a completely different approach. They wanted to bring a taste of England to American fast food. Arthur Treacher's had everything going for it in the early 70s. Named after a British actor who played the perfect butler, this chain promised authentic fish and chips to Americans who'd never set foot in London. And boy, did people bite, literally. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. While McDonald's and Burger King fought over beef patties, Arthur Treacher's owned the fish game. Their golden, crispy cod served with thick-cut chips and malt vinegar transported diners straight to a proper English chippy. Well, sort of, but here's where things got fishy. Pun intended. The chain expanded faster than a politician's promises during election season. By the mid-70s, they had over 200 locations coast to coast. Success breeds confidence, and confidence sometimes breeds stupidity. The first crack appeared when Americans started caring about their waistlines. Suddenly, deep-fried everything wasn't quite as appealing. Then there's the small matter of variety, or lack thereof. When your entire identity revolves around fish and chips, you're basically putting all your eggs in one very greasy basket. Competition didn't help either. Long John Silver's sailed onto the scene with a pirate theme and more menu options. Makes sense, right? Pirates versus butlers in a seafood showdown. Guess who won that battle? The nail in the coffin came from rising food costs and inconsistent quality. Nothing kills a restaurant faster than soggy fish and limp fries. By the late 70s, locations were closing faster than you could say cheerio. The irony? Arthur Treacher himself never actually owned the restaurants bearing his name. He just licensed it for a fee. Smart man. He got paid while someone else dealt with the headaches. Speaking of headaches, our next failed chain had problems that made Arthur Treacher's look like small potatoes. Steak and Ale looked like it had everything figured out. Those Tudor-style buildings with their fake wooden beams, pure marketing genius. Walk inside and you'd find dimmed lighting that made your date look better and your wallet feel lighter. The whole place screamed fancy without actually being fancy. Kind of like wearing a tuxedo t-shirt to a wedding. But here's where things get interesting. The chain's biggest strength became its biggest weakness faster than you could say medium rare. See, Steak and Ale built their reputation on affordable steaks during the early 70s. A decent cut of beef without breaking the bank? Sign me up. They had nearly 300 locations at their peak, each one packed with families celebrating birthdays and couples on budget dates. The alehouse vibe worked perfectly when everyone wanted to feel sophisticated without spending sophisticated money. Then reality hit harder than a tough piece of sirloin. Beef prices started climbing like a rocket in the late 70s. What do you do when your main ingredient costs twice as much but your customers still expect those bargain prices? Well, you panic. That's what Steak and Ale did anyway. Their solution? Smaller portions, cheaper cuts, and menu items that had nothing to do with steak. Suddenly, this steakhouse was pushing chicken and fish like they were running a seafood shack. Makes sense, right? Nothing says authentic steakhouse experience quite like a fish sandwich in a fake English pub. The old world charm that once drew crowds started feeling as outdated as a rotary phone. Customers realized they could get better steaks elsewhere or better ambiance at real restaurants. Steak and Ale got caught in the middle, not fancy enough for special occasions, not cheap enough for casual dining. Their inefficient operations didn't help either. But their biggest mistake? They forgot what made them special in the first place. Speaking of forgetting what made you special, wait until you hear about Burger Chef's spectacular disappearance. Remember when kids' meals came in boring paper bags? Well, you can thank Burger Chef for changing all that. This Indiana-born chain practically invented the Happy Meal concept, though McDonald's gets all the credit now. Talk about getting robbed. Burger Chef wasn't just another burger joint trying to keep up with the big boys. They were actually winning for a while. At their peak, they operated over 1,200 locations across America. That's more restaurants than some people have Facebook friends these days. But here's where things get interesting. While McDonald's focused on speed and Burger King pushed flame broiling, Burger Chef went a completely different route. They created something called the Works Bar, basically a buffet where customers could pile on their own toppings, pickles, onions, lettuce, whatever your heart desired. It was like a salad bar, but for burgers. The concept was brilliant. People loved customizing their food, and it made every burger feel personal. Plus, kids went absolutely nuts for it. What 10-year-old doesn't want to build their own cheeseburger masterpiece? Then reality hit harder than a grease fire. Burger Chef's biggest strength became their worst nightmare. Overexpansion happened so fast, they couldn't maintain quality control. When you're opening new locations faster than teenagers can flip patties, something's got to give. And what gave was consistency. Customers started getting different experiences at different locations. Some Works bars looked fresh and appetizing. Others, well, let's just say they made gas station hot dogs look gourmet. The brand that once competed toe-to-toe with McDonald's suddenly couldn't guarantee a decent meal. The parent company eventually threw in the towel and sold to investors who couldn't save the sinking ship. But Burger Chef's legacy lives on every time you order a kid's meal with toys. Speaking of chains that couldn't maintain their winning formula, former Baltimore Colts star Gino Marchetti figured football fans would love his hamburgers as much as his pass rushing. Well, he was half right. Gino's Hamburgers launched in 1967 and quickly became the place where sports memorabilia met fast food. Think your local Buffalo Wild Wings, but with way more autographed photos and considerably fewer chicken wings. The celebrity angle worked like magic initially. Who wouldn't want to grab a burger from an NFL Hall of Famer? Gino's capitalized on Marchetti's golden reputation, turning every restaurant into a mini sports shrine. Customers loved the connection to their gridiron hero, and the chain exploded across the eastern United States faster than a Hail Mary pass. But here's where things got messy. Success went to their heads quicker than a rookie quarterback's first interception. Rapid expansion became their playbook, but they forgot the fundamentals, like consistent quality control. When you're opening restaurants left and right without proper systems, you end up serving disappointment with a side of cold fries. The celebrity promotions that once drew crowds started feeling gimmicky. Makes sense, right? Even the most devoted football fan gets tired of the same old routine. Meanwhile, McDonald's and Burger King were perfecting their game plans, while Gino's was still relying on yesterday's glory. By the mid-70s, financial challenges were piling up like a goal line stand. The company desperately sold to Marriott Corporation, hoping the hotel giant could save their bacon. At their peak, 359 locations dotted the eastern seaboard, each one a testament to what happens when star power meets business reality. The football approach to fast casual dining couldn't sustain long-term success. Celebrity endorsements only take you so far when your competitors are perfecting the actual food experience. But speaking of architectural experiments in dining, picture a restaurant that looked like an actual barn but served burgers instead of housing livestock. Red Barn took this quirky concept and ran with it, straight into the ground. The chain's signature red barn-shaped buildings were impossible to miss. They stuck out like a sore thumb in shopping centers across America. But that was exactly the point. While McDonald's played it safe with golden arches, Red Barn went full farmhouse fantasy. Their buildings literally looked like something old MacDonald would store his hay in. Here's where things get interesting, though. Red Barn didn't just rely on novelty architecture. They served genuinely massive burgers that made other chains look like they were serving sliders. We're talking about portions so big you'd need a forklift to finish them. Well, maybe not quite, but you get the idea. The self-service format was revolutionary for its time. Customers could customize their orders at a service bar, kind of like Subway before Subway existed. It was fast casual dining before anyone knew what to call it. But success breeds problems faster than rabbits multiply. Red Barn expanded to over 300 locations, mostly concentrated in the Midwest. That's when the wheels started falling off the wagon. Patent issues with their barn design became a legal nightmare. Turns out building restaurants that look like actual barns created more headaches than hamburger sales. Quality control went out the window faster than a pig escaping its pen. Some locations served amazing food while others couldn't flip a burger properly to save their lives. The brand identity became as scattered as seeds in the wind. Were they a family restaurant, a fast food joint, a themed dining experience? Nobody really knew, including Red Barn themselves. Their influence still pops up today in retro-themed restaurants, but the original Red Barn, gone like yesterday's leftovers. Speaking of sweet endings, though, our next chain took dessert to absolutely ridiculous extremes. Remember birthday parties as a kid? Well, Farrell's ice cream parlor turned every visit into one massive celebration. This wasn't your quiet corner ice cream shop where you whispered your order. No way. Walking into Farrell's felt like stepping into a carnival that happened to serve ice cream. The waitstaff didn't just take your order, they performed it. Singing, dancing, making enough noise to wake the neighbors 3 blocks away. And when someone ordered their famous Zoo Sundae, the entire restaurant knew about it. Picture this. Servers running through the dining room carrying massive ice cream creations while a drum rolled in the background. The birthday boy or girl got crowned with a paper hat while everyone sang. It was dinner theater meets dairy products, and honestly, people ate it up like hot fudge on vanilla. But here's where things get interesting. By the mid-70s, Farrell's had over 120 locations buzzing with sugar-fueled chaos. Parents loved it because the kids were entertained. Kids loved it because, well, ice cream and circus acts. Then reality hit harder than brain freeze. The novelty started wearing thin faster than a cone in summer heat. Turns out, all that razzle-dazzle got old. Parents realized they were paying premium prices for what was essentially very loud ice cream. The economic recession didn't help either. When money gets tight, elaborate Sunday spectacles become luxuries families skip. Market saturation played its part too. Every shopping center seemed to have one, diluting that special feeling. What once felt unique now felt as common as vanilla. The carnival atmosphere that made Farrell's famous became its weakness. Maintaining all those theatrical elements cost serious money. Training staff to sing and serve? Expensive. All those props and costumes? More expensive, but speaking of chains that couldn't adapt to changing times, wait until you hear about a place that literally fed people through machines. Remember when getting lunch meant dropping coins into a wall of tiny glass doors? That was Horn and Hardart, the automat kings who made dining feel like operating a giant vending machine. Except way cooler. These weren't your average restaurants. Walk into a Horn and Hardart and you'd face rows of chrome and glass compartments, each holding a different dish. Want apple pie? Insert your nickels, turn the knob, and voila! The little door pops open like magic. It was faster than waiting for a server and more entertaining than watching your neighbor try to parallel park. But here's where things get interesting. At their peak, Horn and Hardart was feeding over 500,000 people daily. That's more mouths than most small cities. Their automats were everywhere, especially in New York and Philadelphia, where office workers lined up like they were at the world's fanciest coin-operated cafeteria. The problem? The 70s brought changes that hit Horn and Hardart like a freight train carrying Big Macs. Suddenly, everyone wanted drive-through speed, not coin-counting precision. Who had time to fish for exact change when McDonald's was slinging burgers faster than you could say special sauce? Then there's the demographic shift that really hurt. The city crowds that loved automats were moving to suburbs where strip malls and drive-thrus ruled supreme. Why drop coins into a machine downtown when you could grab food without leaving your car? The automat concept, once revolutionary, started feeling as outdated as rotary phones. Younger customers found the whole coin-operated experience more confusing than convenient. Makes sense, right? By the late 70s, those gleaming automat walls were disappearing faster than free samples at Costco. The future belonged to different kinds of fast food. But speaking of disappearing acts, wait until you hear about the restaurant chain that once served 28 flavors of everything. Howard Johnson's ruled the American highway like a fast food emperor wearing an orange crown. At their peak, they served more meals than any other restaurant chain in the country. That's right, bigger than McDonald's, bigger than anyone. Their 28 flavors of ice cream became as much a part of summer road trips as arguing with your kids about bathroom breaks. But here's where things get interesting. Hojo's didn't fail because their food was terrible or their service stunk. They failed because they got too comfortable sitting on their throne while the world changed around them. Like that uncle who still thinks his disco moves are impressive at weddings. The company had built their empire on highway monopolies. They'd cut exclusive deals with turnpike authorities, basically owning entire stretches of American interstate dining. Smart move, right? Well, it was brilliant until it wasn't. When those exclusive contracts expired in the 70s, suddenly everyone wanted a piece of the action. McDonald's started popping up at highway exits like dandelions after spring rain. Burger King rolled in with their flame-broiled promises. Even gas stations started serving better coffee than some sit-down restaurants. Meanwhile, Howard Johnson's was still operating like it was 1955, when families had no choice but to stop at their orange-roofed outposts. The real killer? Speed became everything. Families didn't want to sit down for a leisurely meal anymore when they could grab burgers through a drive-through window. Hojo's tried to adapt, but you can't teach an old restaurant chain new tricks overnight. Their famous ice cream couldn't save them from becoming yesterday's news. The orange roofs that once meant good food ahead started meaning slow service this way. Speaking of restaurants that couldn't keep up with changing times, wait until you hear about our next casualty. Walking into a Schrafft's restaurant in the 70s was like stepping into your grandmother's formal dining room. You know, the one where you weren't allowed to touch anything? These weren't your typical fast food joints. Oh no, Schrafft's catered to ladies who lunched and businessmen who believed a proper meal required cloth napkins. But here's where it gets interesting. While McDonald's was revolutionizing speed and convenience, Schrafft's was still operating like it was 1950. They served homemade-style meals with all the pomp and circumstance of a Sunday dinner. Their waitresses wore crisp uniforms, and the decor screamed refined elegance. Think doilies and chandeliers when everyone else was embracing neon and plastic. The problem? Well, times were changing faster than a teenager's mood. Women were entering the workforce in droves, and nobody had time for leisurely 2-hour lunches anymore. The whole genteel dining experience started feeling as outdated as a rotary phone. Schrafft's had over 55 locations, mostly around New York, serving their upscale clientele, but their customer base was literally aging out. Younger diners wanted quick, casual, and affordable. Schrafft's offered slow, formal, and pricey. Makes sense why they struggled, right? The chain's men's lunch culture became a relic when business dining shifted to faster-paced establishments. Their old-fashioned image, once a selling point, became their biggest liability. While competitors adapted and modernized, Schrafft's stubbornly clung to traditions that no longer resonated. By the late 70s, their elegant dining rooms sat increasingly empty. The writing was on the wall, fancy wallpaper, naturally. They couldn't shake their stuffy reputation fast enough to survive the casual dining revolution. And speaking of strange menu combinations that confuse customers, wait until you hear about our next restaurant's bizarre identity crisis. Well, if you thought mixing hot dogs with beer was weird, wait until you hear about Pup and Taco. This West Coast chain took menu confusion to a whole new level by serving both Mexican tacos and American hot dogs under the same orange roof. Talk about having an identity crisis. Founded in 1956, Pup and Taco started small but grew into something of a California legend. The name itself told you everything. They literally served pups, hot dogs, and tacos side by side. Imagine walking into a restaurant today and seeing fish tacos next to corn dogs on the same menu. You'd probably think the printer made a mistake, right? But here's the thing, it actually worked for a while. The chain expanded to over 100 locations across California and the Southwest by the 70s. Their orange and white buildings became as familiar as palm trees on California streets. The food was cheap, fast, and frankly, pretty decent for what it was. Then came the identity crisis that killed them. Were they Mexican? Were they American? Were they a hot dog joint or a taco shop? Customers started getting confused, and confused customers don't become loyal customers. Meanwhile, Taco Bell was laser-focused on perfecting Mexican fast food, and they were doing it better. The final nail came in 1984 when Taco Bell's parent company bought out most Pup and Taco locations. It was like watching the neighborhood bully take your lunch money, except the bully was actually offering you a better lunch. Most locations got converted to Taco Bells overnight. The last original Pup and Taco finally closed its doors in the late 90s. Today, you can still find traces of their influence in California's fusion food culture, but the original chain became just another cautionary tale about trying to be everything to everyone.